Okay, let's get going on this one then. Um, I'm sorry that I am not actually there at the conference today. I have unfortunately been quite sick recently, so I have pre-recorded this one for you guys. Hopefully, you guys can still get some good value out of it and can learn something as we go through the presentation. Um, of course, it means that there's the option to ask questions is not necessarily there. But at the end, you can find my contact details. So if you guys have some questions or if there's things that you want to ask or anything you want to fire off to me, then just use those channels. There's Twitter, there's LinkedIn, and there's also my blog where you'll find my email address as well. So any questions that come up from today, please just get them over to me at that point. Um, Okay, let's dive in, shall we? So the presentation is called basically data-driven incident response. The bad guys are using the data, so why aren't we? Let's dive in. We'll start with a little bit about me. I am let's be the looking a lot less tired than I do today actually. Before I had kids. I'm British. I've lived in Denmark now for 6 years with my wife and two kids. We didn't have the two kids when we moved here. We've had the two kids over the last 6 years or so. And I bought a house here as well last year. So I'm really putting my roots down here, and my plan is to become a full-blown Dane at some point. Um, what do I do in my day job? In my day job, I am the department manager for the Cyber Defense Center at JN Data. I've moved from being the architect behind the scenes to then also managing the team that's working within the Cyber Defense Center. And some of the lessons that we've learned over the last year or so, I'm going to present for you today. Things that have made quite a dramatic improvement in the way that we're also doing our data-driven incident response. I absolutely love open source, not just the open source tools, but the open source mindset as well. And that's kind of why I like talking at conferences and sharing experiences that I've gained from the team and open sourcing as much things as possible. So I have my own blog as well, which I run with a couple of friends called Security Distractions, and there'll be a link at the end of the presentation. And I'll put this presentation online at some point so people can have access to that as well if they want to go back through it. Um, the reason that I love the open source mindset is just I just love this whole idea of sharing and being more open. There's a huge shift in the cybersecurity industry to be more open, to be more embracing of open source technologies, and it's also the mindset behind just sharing things with people and having them contribute back. That's the thing that I think people forget about this is it's not just about, oh, we'll just give this away for free. It's also about, okay, well, we put this out there, other people will take it and they'll contribute, and they could even make this thing that we've done even better. Um, so that's one thing that I absolutely love about open source. Um, what are we going to talk about today? I guess that's the next part that we should dive into. Today, we're going to look at how do we become more data driven in our incident response. And what does it take to become more data driven? And then how, through being data driven, can we enable strategic decision making based on incident response? Now, this is not a difficult sentence, but I'm going to show you how by making some simple changes to the way that you're doing things, whether you have an incident response team, whether you have just one security guy who's doing some form of incident response based on simple alerts that are coming in, how you can make a few changes that could actually enable you very quickly to start being able to be strategic about what's actually coming out of your incident response process. Let's have a look what's next. You'll hopefully get to feel the following things, and that is how easy this process can actually be. There's some lessons learned at the end where I talk about how long it can take, but length or the amount of time it takes does not necessarily equal difficulty. This is actually quite a straightforward process. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time depending on how you want to do it. when you finish with this talk and when this talk is finished, hopefully you'll be a bit more charged up about going back to your own organization and trying something like this. There's a few graphs and things where I show some metrics and show how powerful it can actually be when you start working with data and becoming more data driven in incident response. So how do we become data driven when we do incident response? The first thing we need to do, and this is my 5-step process, if you will, you need to take a step back from your existing incident response setup, and you do this because you need to begin to analyze your process. So you need to go right back to your drawing board and basically find, okay, how does my incident response process look today, and where is it that I need to insert this data part? Where can I start doing this data part to enable me to become more data driven? So you need to go back to your drawing board. The next thing you need to do is also understand where the real value in incident response lies. And we're going to dig into this as we go through the slides. So I'm not going to answer each one of these this exact second, but this is just the steps that I think is on the way to becoming more data driven in your approach. Step 4. After that, you need to basically choose a good data model. Now, there's a big thing in between 3 and 4, which we'll go into as well. But essentially, once you've understood where the value lies and you've understood that this is where I can become more data driven, the next part is to basically say, okay, well, what data do I need to collect to get there? And that's when you need to choose a good data model to be able to handle that. After that, you could produce some metrics, and you could do these metrics based on that data model that you provided. And here is then when basically, as soon as you're able to produce metrics based on the data coming out of incident response, this is where you become data driven, and then you can begin to offload the data into your strategic decision making or into your threat intelligence or wherever you need to offload it into. And we're going to touch into that a little bit when we get further into this presentation. Great. So we go back to the drawing board. And what do we need to do when we go back to the drawing board? Well, what we should probably do is let's draw out our incident response process. Let's look at what does our current incident response process actually look like. So let's start mapping this out. Whiteboards are pretty much the key to success in this one. And everything that I'm talking about today is a process that we have been through at J Data that I started a long time ago, and so I know based on experience how to do this to some degree. So here's a very simple incident response process. There's some stuff missing from here, communication and other bits and pieces, but basically for the sakes of this presentation, let's keep it really, really simple. I'm going to talk about the different stages very, very quickly. So in a simple incident response process, you have your stage 1, and your stage 1 is where you're receiving alerts into. So this is where alerts are kind of being generated from. So this could come from something as simple as a Defender ATP if you're using Windows Cloud or something else like that, or even more simple for Defender coming from a Windows workstation as well. So so something very simple could be generating alerts over here. Now the next part of your incident response process is going to have to be based on, okay, when these alerts come in, where are they coming into? How do I then visitate these alerts when they come in? Like, how do I put a queue in there so I can actually, get these alerts in and then start working with them one by one? And that's what your stage 2 is about. That's where you're visitating your alerts and actually seeing, okay, firstly, is there a chance that these are false positive? Can I do some very quick assessment here that says, are these just a noise? Is this just an accident that these are coming? Stage 3 is then when obviously that alert has gone from being visitated, it's been a successful alert and saying this is something that actually needs to be investigated. So this is actually now becoming an event. And then stage 3 is when you do your analysis. And in stage 3 is your, okay, this event that I've got here, can I find out more information about this event? Can I go and essentially go and find out, okay, has this event had impact? And if it has, what has it had impact on? So by the time you are in stage 3, you're doing your analysis, and one thing we should mention about each block here is that there's some sort of data, and we'll come into this more deeper as we go through the presentation. But basically, to move from each stage, from stage 1 into stage 2, there has to be some sort of requirements that are met here. There also has to be some sort of requirements that are met here. And then when you're leaving stage 3 and you're happy with you've done your analysis, you're ready to actually enact some sort of response in incident response. there needs to be some data again here that's being fulfilled that enables you to move into response. Because how do you know what type of response actions you need to take if you haven't analyzed what the what the impact has been, and which hosts have been affected in stage 3? You have to have fulfilled some sort of data inside here that can allow you to move to stage 4. Now, stage 4 is quite funny when we talk about incident response and we say that response actually comes in stage 4 in incident response, but it's true. Response is where you basically take the information that you've gathered from your analysis and then make a decision on how are we going to treat this data. When I say how are we going to treat this data, I mean things like, okay, so the data you've gathered about it was this workstation and this user that were affected inside this incident. What are we going to do? So what actions are we actually going to take? Are we going to lock out this user in Active Directory? Are we going to contain this user's machine and block it so they can't actually have any access to our corporate network while we get it back in, and then enable some recovery actions as well? So stage 4 is obviously then when you do this part of this work, you actually take actions based on your analysis. And stage 5 is where you actually make your report about what you've seen inside the previous stages. So here is where you go through and you do some sort of management level reporting, where you basically say, look, we've seen the following incident. It's had the following impact. We've taken the following actions, and here is our report. Now, reporting is obviously where you're also able to provide your lessons learned. So you're able to do some sort of root cause analysis based on the previous situations that you've seen, and then you can do some sort of root cause analysis and say, okay, this is what was actually happening, and here's a report for whoever needs this report, either a customer or management, to tell them this is what happened, and this is the entire thing that happened inside this incident. So that's a very simple incident response process, and actually this process will actually get you quite far. A lot of people tend to draw them with huge Visio diagrams with huge, okay, and now it goes from this step to this step, and now it goes in here and here and here, and actually, for in terms of actually being able to look at where do you become more data driven, you don't need anything more complex than this. But let's see what I mean by that. So in terms of that incident response process, where was the value in that incident response process? So let's have a look. If we take up our previous incident response process that we looked at a second ago, let's have a look. So the value is not necessarily in alerting in incident response. Of course, it provides some sort of value by actually kickstarting the chain of events, but it's the value is not necessarily where that's not the main value creation out of incident response. It's also the same. It's not the same in visitation either. When you're working with your queue and you're sorting your queue, of course that provides value for your constituents and provides value for you, because you can actually see, okay, this is how I'm organizing myself, but that's also not necessarily generating massive amounts of value for your organization. Analysis. Now, a lot of people think that this is where the value of incident response is provided. And if you actually ask an analyst who works inside incident response, they'll tell you this is where the real value is, because this is where I get to do all the fun stuff that I do, reverse engineering of malware, or network-based intrusion detection analysis, or anything else like that, where this is where you can have a lot of fun. And okay, there's some value inside here. There's definitely some value in here, because this is where you can find out the impact that an incident has had. And okay, there's some value here, but then we move into response, and we can basically say, okay, is there value in actual response? So when you actually take these actions, yes, there's value per incident inside this, and there's obviously value in preventing an entire ransomware outbreak by stopping a very, very simple phishing email from compromising a machine. But I still also don't believe that that's where the full value is. I mean, what happens when your upper management come and say, okay, guys, it's really great what we're hearing about what you're doing, but can you tell us what you've done across the last year? Can you tell us the types of incidents that you've been seeing? And then you sit there and say, okay, well, no, we've done some great response, and we've got nothing to show for this, because although the organization is safe, how do you show how safe it is? How do you show how resilient it's actually been? And all you have there is words. So let's move on from response and actually look at the real value of incident response. And if you think that incident response is a reactive process, right? So it's a reaction to something. And the most important thing that you can get out of this reaction is some form of report. Now, a lot of people get bored, and incident responders definitely get bored when we talk about reporting, because it's something that's it's starchy, it's dodgy. You have to actually go through and, okay, now I've got to fill out this, now I've got to write this. But actually, in terms of the organization that you're working in, reporting is the number one value creation step that you can perform in incident response. It's the number one place where value comes out of, because as soon as you start doing reporting, it could be a per incident report where you actually learn something from it. You produce some lessons learned inside the report, and you put that back into the organization, and you can enact change via that report. Um, you could sit in a meeting with management, actually show them, break it down. Here's the executive summary. Here's exactly what happened in the different steps. So by doing reporting, you're really trying to learn something from the incident that you had. Now, I talked about that as a per incident reporting, but not just that. When you actually do good reporting, you can kick this out into, over the course of time, multiple incidents can come together to create metrics based on those incidents. When then here comes the real value, because over time, if you're able to do good reporting, you can actually enable long-term metric-based analysis of your incident response process or your incident response over the last year. So how many times have we been hit by social engineering, or how many times have we seen this? You can actually do that if you actually do good reporting. Now we're going to come into how we actually do this in a second. So let's move on. Now, where do we start? Earlier, I said we need to take a step back from our incident response process and actually look at it, and that's what we just did in the previous slide. We actually tried to look at, here's a basic incident response process, and okay, where's the value? So if the value comes in reporting, um, how can we make a very simple change to become data driven? Now, when I say how can we make a simple change to become data driven, that's because I would like the data to feed my reporting. Reporting obviously needs to output some sort of data somewhere. If you want to do good reporting, you want to get metrics out of your reporting, there needs to be some sort of data that's coming in there, and it needs to be structured. Um, and when we come into this, we can say, well, where do we need to make a simple change in our incident response process to enable becoming more data driven? And actually, here's where it gets funny, because on the last slide, I said we were looking at stage 5 as being that place where value is created. And here's our incident response process again. And yeah, of course, stage 5 is where value is created, but is stage 5 where you can actually start working with data? Do you only want to start working with data at stage 5? If you do, you're going to have a very, very long-winded incident response process, because you're going to, if you want to just start inserting data here, you're going to have to basically go back through your incident response process each time you have an incident and look at, okay, what data was here? Can I get this data out, and can I put it into my table? And if you're only working with that table or that data model in stage 5, every incident is going to take a long amount of time, because you're going to solve the incident, and you're going to have to go back through the incident each time and re-record the data that you found. And this is why I say it's not stage 5. Now, and obviously, if I was in the conference hall and I was with you guys, I'd be asking the question of where do you guys think it is, and I'm sure there'd be some really really interesting incident responses. But we don't really have that luxury, so I'm just going to skip ahead and tell you where you need to start to do this. I hope I'm going to tell you. Yes, it comes in actually at visitation. Now, of course, you can enforce some sort of data onto the stage 1 of your incident response process. Of course, you can, but it's actually in stage 2 where that alert comes into your incident response team that you can really start adding data into your incident response process. And if you start early enough, when you move into analysis and you already have this data structure that you want, when you're doing your analysis just becomes about recording what you've seen into that structure. Um, and in stage 2 is where this really starts, because once an alert comes in, then you can start recording it already in stage 2. You can start ordering it and getting it ready for your queue based on certain parameters that have been set inside that data table, if you will. So it's stage 2 where you can really, really start to become data driven, and it's early enough that your team can actually work with it, and they can move this data model as they're working with it through stage 2 into stage 3 into stage 4, and then by the time it gets to stage 5, it's already ready for reporting. They don't need to go through and do loads of extra work going back to kind of fulfill the data model you set at stage 5. They've already worked with it from stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. So already by that point, and it lands in stage 5, reporting can sometimes be a simple click of a button and a quick executive summary, and boom, you can fire it out of your team. And that's what also incident response teams are looking for. They're looking for some quick wins and some places where they can save time. And it's definitely by enabling being data driven in stage 2. So now we've found where the value is. Now we found where we need to actually insert this data drivenness into. And the one thing that we're going to need to do to be able to become data driven in that stage is we're going to need to find a data model. I'm calling it data model. I'm sure people who work at data scientists are going to strangle me for calling it that, but that's just what I'm calling it. Now, in order to adopt this data model, and I'll show you if people are still unclear about how this is all tying together, we'll come into that in a second when I actually land on some good examples of how this is working. Um, we're adopting a data model. Of course, first we have to actually create the model. Um, this is actually known as an incident classification model, and I spent a lot of time last year actually researching these incident classification models, having various talks with lots of industry leaders about um, which type of model is appropriate for which use case. And I'm going to share a little bit of that information as I get to the later part of this presentation. But I just want to say that if people are looking, instead of calling it a data model, yes, it could be an incident classification model. There's tons of names, but this is the more formal name. You want to base it on the questions that you want to answer. So if you're going to create your own one and not go with an industry standard model, then what questions is it that you want to actually your incident response process to answer? What questions is it you want it to answer across a year as an example? So let's look at a simple question. So yeah, what sort of metrics do I want in the future? How about something simple like this? Okay, how many times have our HR department been hit by phishing in the last year? So there's already a question that we can actually now pose back to our incident response process and say, cool, I would like you to collect some sort of data that enables us to learn more about how many times phishing has been seen. But you're also going to have to collect data about how many times the HR department have been hit as well. And maybe not just hit by phishing, but also just hit by any type of incident in general. So you're going to have to collect something about the phishing, and you're going to have to collect something about the HR department. And if you just take something very, very simple, and this is where the examples are gonna come in, so you can actually see how easy this can actually be. Here's one I made earlier. Now, this is something incredibly basic, but again, you'll see the value this can have. So here we have something very simple: incident number 01. The username David, the endpoint is a workstation 01 or WS01. The department is a security department. The type of incident that they saw was phishing, and it was actually a security incident. So it actually had some sort of impact, and it actually became a security incident. Now, already, as simple as this looks, this is super powerful because this can actually enable metrics based from this. Now, if you can imagine that, okay, this is a simple table here, and if I sent this to management and said this is the type of case that we had, this is exactly what we saw, this would obviously be thrown out, but it's very simple right now. And the reason for showing you this is actually because to show you how you can generate metrics from something simple like this. Because if I have a second incident, and I record the second incident using the same model that I used here with these same names, I can see that, okay, we've got incident number 02, we've got a username, we've got endpoint, we've got department, we've got an incident type, and we've got security incident. Now, if I look at this and say, okay, I've had 2 incidents now, what can I learn from these 2 incidents as a whole? Well, so far I've seen that I've had 2 security incidents already in my incident response process. So here I can actually start to make metrics on how many times have we had security incidents. Not just that, but also here we have an incident type of phishing. So how many times have I seen phishing across the last period? Now we're also looking at previously, like I said, the department. So we're going to want to measure the department if we want to know, answer that question about how many times have HR been hit by phishing in the last period. Here we can do that because we're recording that information. Now the last one that I'll talk about here is incident number 3. This is where you also start to get correlation based on your previous incidents as well, because now I can say, okay, cool, in incident number 3, David was also present. So how many incidents have I seen, or how many events have I seen where the username David was also present, the workstation was also present, or also the department? Um, and even something simple like this, if you can imagine that you store 100 incidents like this across 6 months, imagine the cool metrics that you can get out of that. Um, Metrics like this as an example. So if we look at what we just saw, and if we couple it together and say we had many more incident types, or many more, not incident types, but many more incidents or events, well, look, because we're recording them in that structure that we had before, we can actually do things like look at how many times have we seen phishing, or how much has phishing developed over a certain period in our incidents. And whoa, look at this. We can see that in January we only had 2, but then suddenly in February we had 12. And then it started to drop. Now we can say maybe at this point, by actually producing these metrics, we actually fed back to the organization, hey guys, I think we need to focus on some sort of user awareness because we keep getting hit by phishing. And here we can see maybe that's what actually happened in this process, and then the numbers start to drop down because there's been a much more sharp looking at, well, we need that user awareness in place. We need to do something about this because we've seen such a high level of incidents. And then here you can already see the power that this has. If you weren't doing this before, adopting something simple like this, look at the power. You can go to a management meeting and say, hey guys, look, we've seen a huge rise in social engineering. And this can then, like I said, enable some sort of decision making that says, we need to do something about this. There's also another metric that you can look at when you start adopting this model, and that is also the development of security incidents over time as well. It doesn't just have to be based on the incident type. It can also be looking at security incidents as a whole. How many times have an organization faced a security incident? And remember, security incidents would then be based on impact. So how many times have we actually had an event that's been turned into an incident because it had impact? And again, look, you can see the development over time, and you can see that maybe in this organization, again, we looked at the whole social engineering numbers here that were generating this number of incidents, and we actually took good action. And so by April, we're back down at almost January levels of impact in our incidents. And this is how simple it can be. Even just using those simple tables that I showed before to just enforce that data model, it has so much power and so much potential. I'm just looking at time. Yeah, it's getting tight, so I won't speed up, but I'll try to cover as much as possible in the shortest time. Now, there's one problem here. What can you see when we look at this data, this model here? So we've enforced our model. We said these are the fields that we want to work with, but now look at the problem. This one does not equal this one, even though they're both the same and they actually are based on the same incident. There's a few issues in this one and this one. The first one is the username. Look, the username. We've allowed for free text entry. We haven't locked the incident response team into actually being able to just select some fields or have a dictionary behind this that says when you insert a username, or have some rules, sorry, semantics, or whatever you want to call it behind this that says when you insert a username, it must be capital. It must be structured like this. Because again, how do you correlate these two together? If one is with uppercase and one is with lowercase, you've lost the ability to correlate. So you've actually then lost the value of this process. Again, look, we've got a lowercase workstation, lowercase phishing, and actually we've used a different word to describe whether it was a security incident. So actually, if you were to do this across 10 cases and have different types, you wouldn't ever be able to align those 10 cases together. There's no way to do correlation if you don't enforce this strict model and these strict dictionaries behind these wordings. So in terms of security incident, you need to decide, is it going to be called yes or no, or is it going to be called confirmed or unconfirmed? Things like that can be that you think are so rudimentary or so simple, they can have such a huge impact if you don't try to focus on them right at the start and actually enforce this at the very start of what you're doing. So like I said, in stage 2, enforce this data model behind the scenes. Um, yeah. How do we make this how do we enterprise this? How do we enterprise this? Yeah. Should we stick with our own created model that I showed earlier? Is it too simple for the enterprise? There's some benefits, like I said, that it's simple to use for you guys. You created it yourself, so you know it. But there's some caveats here. Is it an actual industry standard? So when you go and talk to senior level management, is it something that they're going to be able to acknowledge? Are they looking to reading the latest Gartner blog and seeing this is not the language we should be using, guys? You shouldn't be creating your own. You should be choosing this one off the shelf up here. And you'd also need to lifecycle your model. Now, this is where it gets tricky because, again, you need to ensure that every few months that you're actually keeping up that is this model actually still appropriate for our organization? And it's a constant process, and it's a caveat you have to do when you create your own model. When you choose one off of the shelf, you can actually have them lifecycle it for you. So you can just look and see, okay, they've added these new fields. That looks interesting for me. I'll add them too. And this is when I come into what else is there. Now, I'd love to spend the next hour telling you about all the research I did into this and all the different models that there are out there and all the times I was banging my head on the table whilst trying to research it. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to just show you the model that we chose at JN Data and how powerful it can be when you're working with it. Now there's a montage here, and I'd love to be able to do the montage, but let's just imagine that we've been through that whole process, and now we're into talking about Verus. Now, Verus is probably one of the biggest things that I've done in my career in terms of onboarding it into JN Data. It's one of the most probably important things that I've learned in my entire time in working in security. And Verus is essentially the vocabulary for event recording. It's a common language for how we can describe incidents. and it enables powerful metrics by essentially enforcing structure, enforcing the naming convention, enforcing not just the naming convention, but also the dictionary behind each field that says this is the max. These are the only things you can use to describe this field. Here's it locked in, and here's exactly how it should be described. It was created by Verizon. They use it in their Verizon breach report. If anyone has seen this, it's absolutely incredible, and it's actually where I got the inspiration to do what I'm doing at JN Data and in the security industry and in the finance sector. Um, it's based on the 4A model, which is essentially you have an asset, you have an action, you have an actor, and you have some attributes. Asset being this is describing the workstation, describing the endpoint this happened on. The action being, okay, what actually happened? Was it social engineering? Was it hacking? What was that action? Actor being internal, external. There's a lot more stuff you can look into this if you would like to, but attributes then also being impact. So how do we describe what we actually saw? And if anyone hasn't seen this DBIR by Verizon, you should really go and have a look at it because, like I said, it's exactly the thing that I've chosen to do at JN Data as well, just internally. Um, so here's where I use the term vericize your incident. So if we take the incident one of the incidents that we recorded earlier, how do we turn this and make this more enterprise level and actually apply an industry standard model to this? So we're going to vericize this model here. Now, here's where I've applied a very simple version of Verus. Now, you can make Verus as difficult or as simple as you want to by deciding on the fields that you want to pick, and after that, you can then run away and start working with them. You can already see in here, we've done a few things like remove the spaces and done a few things where it enables us to put this into code and put it into JSON format if we want to and do some funky stuff with that later on. We've done things like security incident has now been changed from a yes into confirmed. We've added a discovery method so we can actually make metrics based on discovery method. We've changed incident type into some sort of action. So the action that's been seen here has been social engineering. Now there's a dictionary behind the action in Verus, and there's only 6 different actions or 5 different actions. I can't remember exactly. I could get it up, but there's no need. You can have a look at that later. There's some actions that are enforced behind the scenes, and those are the only ones you can choose inside an incident. You've also got your user that we talked about before, your workstation here. Again, we see asset dot user asset dot workstation. Then you've got your actor field where you can say this happened externally. And then you've got some attributes here where you can say, okay, some of these are based on that CIA triangle, which we use in incident response. And the CIA triangle is essentially confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That CIA triangle is a measurement of impact to some degree. So, what has been impacted in this incident? So, have we seen the integrity of a workstation be affected? Well, yes, because there's been impact and a malicious code has been inserted into that workstation. Okay, cool. So the integrity has been breached. What about confidentiality? Well, yes, the attacker was exfiltrating data, and it wasn't very clear in this that was what was happening. But over here, it can be made even clearer. Look, the confidentiality has been breached, so therefore something has happened with some sort of data leak here. And you can see here just by choosing an even a basic Verus model, the amount of more data that we can actually get out of here. So I can look at this and start making even more metrics, more and more metrics. I become completely metric mad. We can look at impact over time, impact types over time. So you can see here again mapping up against that the security incident numbers that we had earlier. We can see that there was a huge rise in integrity breaches. So how many times that malicious code was inserted into a machine, and again it follows the same trend that we showed earlier. But you can see how powerful these trends can actually become when you start locking in that data and then making sure that you can actually get these metrics out. And this is an incredibly powerful metric to have where you can actually show, do we need to do something based on the fact that confidentiality is actually increasing? So we're seeing more and more data being leaked out. Well, now we need to do something very serious. We need to look at implementing new tools or implementing new processes. And this is something so powerful that doing something like onboarding Verus can actually do for your organization. So what can I do with this data and these metrics? Or again, like I said, you can drive these strategic decision-making processes within your organization by actually going and saying, guys, we need more budget for data loss prevention because we're seeing more and more confidentiality breaches, seeing more and more data going out of the house. Here, again, look, we can make these statements where we say, hey guys, we've seen an increase in phishing against the HR department this month. Can we do some targeted awareness training for those guys who are actually seeing that there's been this increase? Now, this is incredibly powerful. This can actually completely change the overview of your organization across a year, where you actually say, okay, these guys are constantly getting hit because they're the guys receiving CVs. As an example, compromised CVs are being sent into HR. let's concentrate on those guys. And how can we do that? We do that because we've got the numbers now. Before, this could have been based on feeling. Okay, I had a feeling that our HR team was being hit, but now I can actually see it with my own eyes. I'm actually recording that data and I can see it. Another one we could see is, okay, well, the incident response team has seen double the amount of security incidents in the last year. Well, now I actually have some numbers. I can go to my boss and say, hey, I need some more staff. And when he comes back and says, well, why? Instead of me saying, well, I had a feeling that we had more security incidents. No, I can come with a locked in graph that says, look, you can see over time that we see more and more security incidents of this type. And we can't do very much about this type. And that means that actually, in order to work with that type, we cannot implement any more controls or anything else. We need some more people to help us do those investigations when they come in, so I can hire more staff. We can also enable threat intelligence by actually recording certain specific types of data. Again, like I said, we can look at different people that are being targeted. We can look at different actors as well when we start going deeper into this and becoming more mature in this data model. And I'd love to talk for hours about how we can use this to enable threat intelligence. I'm actually giving a talk at Info Security, or recorded another talk for Info Security later in the month, where I'll basically, it will be the second part to this talk, where we look at how data can then, you can start in this process, and the next step is how you enable threat intelligence through this data process. um, you can also begin sharing this data. So something very simple. A lot of people think threat intelligence is really, really secretive, and not secretive, but really kind of dark art magic sometimes. And I know one of the guys from Computech is going to be talking about threat intelligence, and he should open up the box to show that it's not some sort of dark art. But even here, by beginning to go and talk with your peers, so going and talking with someone else in the sector and saying, look, we've seen these trends over the last year. This is also then threat intelligence. You're sharing information or data about what you've been seeing. You're sharing intelligence about what you were seeing with your peers, who can then use this to then make their decisions as well, where they can say, well, we haven't seen that. Is that because we don't have the same tools as you? Is that because you've got better processes? What can we learn from each other? And becomes very, very powerful. Now, I know I'm running out of time, so I'll go into my lessons learned now. And I make it sound easy, and I make it sound easy because I've done this. I've been working in this for the last, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months or so to a year, where we've been onboarding this process into my team and into JN Data. And this stuff takes time. It doesn't change overnight. Um, from my own experiences, my cyber defense center team, they understood the concept on day one. So we spent a lot of time around the whiteboard actually talking about what do we want to gather inside the incident, what are the questions we want to answer, and then what information do we actually want to gather, and how do we want to do it. And we understood the concept on day one, but that doesn't mean that we were able to work with that concept from day one. That just means that we had an understanding of this is the direction that we need to go to. Now, they were part of creating it, which also meant that they had some ownership, which meant that it became a bit easier to move this model, and get it onboarded into the team. But even though they were part of creating it and they felt ownership, changing that way that you were doing recording incident response is not just a quick. You also have to change the behavior of a team. Your team has to get used to working with this new model. Some of the things that I had for my team was, well, but incidents will now take double the amount of time. And and yeah, of course they are, but at the same time, fine, then that extra amount of time that they take still can provide much more value by actually then enabling this process afterwards. So yeah, it might take an extra 10 minutes to finish an incident, or an extra half an hour to finish an incident. But finally, once the incident's finished, that can go through to our repository of data, and we can then produce metrics off of it. So I would say that those half an hour that you spend, or those extra hour that you spend in an incident, is way more than worth it, because it can then enable better decisions for the organization afterwards. And this was something that took a long time for my team to get used to. And it's not because they are they're awesome. My team, they're really great at understanding this, and even with some of the best in the industry, like we're about to become TFC certified. So we'll be the only one in Denmark with a certification that says that we are industry leaders in what we're doing in our incident response team. It still took around 8 months to get this integrated into the team of working with this daily. We had weekly meetings where we would go over, have we understood this? Can we look at previous incidents and make sure that they're mapped up correctly? We had monthly talks where before we released the reports that we were generating, metric based reports. Are these correct? Have we actually understood Varus correctly? I spent a lot of time getting JN Data to onboard this into their own DNA. So not just my incident response team, but also JN Data. And that also took some time. Take it slow. This is my last piece of advice about this: is when you're going to do this, take it slow. Understand the value, go through the process that I've said. and just take it slow. There's no rush, right? Small changes can enable massive value afterwards. So adopting this model is in my mind is a small change that takes time. Um, so yeah, the outro to my talk is the end finally. What did we learn today from this talk? I hope everyone learned something, or at least got something that they can take home with them. And I'm going to say that hopefully you learned that being data driven is actually quite simple. There's a few simple things that you can do to enable this to work. Um, you also need to take a step back from your IR process. That's the first one. Take a step back from your incident response process. That's the first part of this. Plan where the value should be driven from. You might find when you do this that actually, you know what, David, you're talking nonsense. It's not stage two. It's actually stage one. Or you know what, it's not stage one or two for me. It's stage three. Okay, that's great. I'm not the overall supreme leader of this right now. I'm just the one who's saying, from my experience, Jane data is actually in stage two. Plan for yourself where that value is going to come from out of your IR process. Plan where to start. So when you decide on this is where the value is, where do I need to start in my process to in order me to enable that value to be created? So yeah, plan where to start with your data-driven activities. Create or find your data model. So go and do some research if you want to into what the data models are out there, or create your own, like I showed earlier, how simple it can be to actually create that. And then start showing that value from your incident response process. Hopefully this has been understood in this talk, and people aren't sitting there thinking, wow, this guy knows it all, and is making it sound so easy, and it's not. I'm not, like I said, from my lessons learned, I fully appreciate how difficult this can actually be, but it's also simple. It just takes time. So start having a go. Start doing some simple tests on a whiteboard. Start doing some simple things in Excel. You'll work magic afterwards, and you'll be able to show your management, holy moly, look what we're actually seeing. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. I hope it was interesting. And like I said, any questions or anything else that you want to ask after this, please send them to me. I'm on LinkedIn. My name is this one. I'm on Twitter under at dcsecurity.dk. I'm trying to get more followers, so I'm doing quite well there. I think I'm on 555 at the point of talking. So yeah, come follow me and listen to me talking nonsense. And then my blog as well, which is securitydistractions.com. So thank you very much, guys, and I hope to see you soon.